Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Professor Jozef Colpaert. He has worked his entire life as a teacher, as a developer, and as a researcher in several languages, and he has traveled around the world. He has had a fruitful academic life with interesting events and exchanges on technology and language. He's retired now, and he explained to me that he's very happy to wake up every morning and have complete freedom over what to read, what to write, and what to think. And most importantly, he's here today because he has important things to say about language and technology. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thanks for the invitation, Javier and Paul. Xavier. Yeah, okay. Well, complete freedom is a relative concept. Of course, my wife tells me what to do every day, but okay. I want to tell you something about the added value of technology and the role of context in the design of L1 learning environments. Well, I can be very brief about this. This is what I would like to say. Thank you for your attention. No, I think it's something based on more than 40 years in the field, starting with punch cards in 76, 78, that time, and ending with artificial intelligence and generative AI. I came to the conclusion, that's a hypothesis, of course, for you to test and evaluate, that the added value of a technology is the match of the degree of alignment between the requirements of a learning environment and the affordances of a specific technology. Okay, that's it. Let's explain that a little bit further. Well, these are the points I'm going to need to explain in order to understand my formula. So let's go very quickly there. My first point is, I don't have to explain that to you, about the importance of L1, important for literacy development, identity formation, language awareness, critical thinking, motivation, and self-regulation, and you can probably add many other aspects. But in my view, I'm not an L1 specialist, rather L2 and technology and teacher education. The important and interesting fact for us is that the acquisition of L1 has a considerable impact on L2 acquisition, what you already know, of course. Positive transfer, negative effect, interference, cognitive foundation, identity and affective factors, motivation, self-regulation. You know all that. But why educational technology? Why would you use educational technology, not just AI? There are many other, not just AI or generative AI. Someone said earlier, we forget that there are many other technologies still available, just like an ordinary textbook and a whiteboard. Why technology to use in L1 and by extension in L2? My question to many teachers is always, why do you think you use a specific educational technology? For many reasons. You probably do so for the right reasons, but do you think you know why? And this is the basis of our research. Still, many people, certainly with AI, will ask learners and teachers what they want. And my point is, also recognized in other disciplines, in marketing, for instance, finally they recognize that most people are not aware of their reasons for making a decisions. So it is not very useful to ask them, what do you want, what do you need? People don't really know. So, well, I have another quote by, a little bit paraphrasing what Degas said on painting. Choosing an educational technology is easy when you don't know how, but very difficult when you do. It's like teaching. It's very, very easy when you don't know what. I thought it's a fun thing. Let's start with the AI hype wave. And I look back 40, 50 years. And some people say, yes, that now the AI wave, hype wave is something very serious that will revolutionize our lives. Yeah, it's a big change, but I keep calm. I said, I've seen this before. Not that serious, okay. Well, what we see is, as a former editor, what I have seen last year and 2 years ago is a sudden tsunami of publications and also presentations at conferences like these on AI. Although I must say that I'm amazed by the quality of the conferences I have attended, and the focus on AI is not exaggerated. The focus is still on learning and teaching and language acquisition and the skills, and that is, I have a very, very, very good impression of this. Well, but my problem with AI is that it's what I hear is mostly by self-proclaimed experts. Suddenly, everyone was an expert in AI, but really very few people know the technology behind AI. I find this a huge problem. I don't think AI is even intelligent. I will explain that later, why. And what I know about the technology is that the technology itself has not changed considerably since the 80s. It's all about neural networks. But the difference is that we now have huge amounts of data to send through those neural networks. Okay, the technology is more powerful. We see dancing robots and soccer-playing robots, which I think is the easiest application of technology, because we have faster processors, more powerful sensors, cameras, etc., etc. A problem is that, okay, we see these systems that can translate, that can answer questions, etc., but this knowledge that makes systems able to do that is not extractable. We can't do anything with these huge neural networks, with the knowledge that is accumulated in. There are, as you know, ecological. We need more nuclear power plants to have enough power for all these systems. There is problem of authorship, etc., etc. But my point is, we have not really learned from the past. Why? Because all the attention goes to look at what we can do now with AI, with all these new functionalities, all these new possibilities. Then I say, if you think this possibility is something innovating and interesting, why didn't you ask it 5 to 10 years ago? Why didn't you say that you needed it? Because you knew it was impossible. And this is, then I say, okay, let's do the same thing. If you apply that principle, why can't you formulate now what you need, whether it's possible or not? We should change our attitude and focus. I don't say that knowing what's on offer is not important. No, we should know what's on offer, and many people talk about it, and it's very important to see the dangers and the opportunities and the threats, what we are doing now. The problem is, I say we should look at the demand side at the same time in depth, and really try to see what do learners and teachers actually need. This question has not been asked sufficiently in the last 20 to 30 years. AI does not meet, in my view, enough the needs and the goals, because we have not specified, and does not take into account the context to a sufficient degree. The context is, AI does not, except if you put your context in the prompt, AI does not know enough. It's not intelligent enough to that extent that it knows your context. As a teacher, it will provide you with content, but it will never know exactly which type of content and which tasks for your students. So my main question is, what do L1 learners and teachers actually need? What I must say, taught in my courses, I will continue to say what I teach. In my course of educational technology, there are 10 possible reasons for using technology. And this is my slide. Well, don't read it in detail. There are technological reasons because it's there, the presence. There's a pressure by colleagues and the students themselves. There are interesting features. There are pedagogical reasons like, you want to do something better in practice. You want to apply some theory like social constructivism. Or there are some interesting attributes that may have an impact on information processing and on memory. like Meyer's model. More importantly, there are psychological reasons like mental acceptance of technology, the affordances. I come back to that concept and what has been mentioned. I'm very glad for that in many presentations, self-determination theory and motivation in general. My point is design. Design, how can design be a reason for using educational technology? Well, the demand for technology arises from the design of an optimal learning environment as a final step in the design process. Technology is not a starting point. When you design a learning environment, you will formulate at a certain step, you will formulate things that are not there yet. You will say, okay, I have this content, I have this classroom, I have these students, etc., etc. But if you want to design the best possible learning environment, and this is what has not been done enough, teachers already say, yeah, well, that will not be possible for practical reasons, for financial, political reasons. No, designing a building is not building the actual building itself. People should see the difference between the real learning environment and the learning environment that you design, the optimal learning environment that you have in mind. Now, for the record, none of these reasons is bad, and none of these reasons is the only good reason. A good mix. I tell my students to say, well, why as a teacher wouldn't you use a technology one day and test it out with your students because it's there? Why wouldn't you do that and talk with your students about the use of the technology? No problem. But if you, as a teacher, want to make justifiable decisions and consider your daily work more and more as research, then I advise you to try design. What is design? Teachers should become designers, yes, of course. I think that many people agree with that. Design as a product feature, but more importantly, design can be a product feature, but in my case, in my view, it's a process. Designing a learning environment is not saying, well, the perfect learning environment looks like this. That's the design. No, it's going through certain stages. And the most beautiful thing in my experience, what I have been doing all my life in many countries all over the world, is trying to find the same model I can give them, the same model, the same process, and see if they apply it, what is the result? And it was always so beautiful to see that in every context, in every situation, we arrived at polymorphous, very beautiful, different results. Apply the same model and leading to different results according to the context. Design is a question of 3 A's. You should apply, like a good architect, apply theory, models, principles, rules, etc. The second A is you should adapt that to the context. If you build a house, you should take into account the context. But also approximation, and this is very important, as I said. There's no such thing as the perfect learning environment. We should tell the teachers, don't try in the first year that you teach to apply everything and to be perfect. This is what I call that leads to the Sunday evening syndrome. Do you know the Sunday evening syndrome? That's a feeling that you have here when you have to teach on Monday as a young teacher 8 hours and on Tuesday 7 hours, and you know in advance that you cannot prepare all your lessons well enough. Tell them, no, just do it, but learn from it. Look at what happens if you do something and try to do it next time better. When I was teaching, I always had a sheet and I wrote down immediately what I had to do better the next time I was teaching it. Approximation. The learning environment to be designed will always be a hypothetical approximation in a cyclic and iterative approach to the optimal solution. Release the pressure from the teacher from that point, the young teacher, and say, just teach, follow your instinct, apply what you have learned, apply, application, take into account your context, but don't try to do it directly perfect. You're unable to do that, you don't have the time and the energy. Now they asked me, which instructional design models then can we apply? Well, there are hundreds of instructional design models. I had a problem. And some colleagues have written courses explaining some of them, and they ask in the exam, apply this model on your situation. I've tried to do that. Problem was, to be honest, I don't know all these models myself. So what you do then? I try to make, based on my experience as a teacher, I've been a language teacher for 6 years in secondary education and arrived accidentally at university. But my background is a little bit, well, what did I learn in education? L'art du possible, as they say in French. El arte de lo posible. There is not enough knowledge available in terms of substantiated findings, with all respect for educational research, sorry, which would enable us to improve education, solve problems, or design solutions in a systematic, methodological, and justifiable way. That means that if you tell that to teachers, you will be confronted, you will be thrown in the jungle, you will have to survive, you will be thrown in the pool and you will have to swim. That's a better attitude. And then say, okay, what can I give the teachers so that they can survive, that they can cope with the situation and say, hey, listen, it's normal that they don't know how to react in that situation. So what do you do when you do not know? And that's why I give this quote, well, I must say, in all honesty, attributed to Piaget. No one ever knows if he actually has written this one day. But the idea is interesting. L'intelligence n'est pas ce qu'on sait, mais ce qu'on fait quand on ne sait pas. Intelligence is not what you know, but what you do when you do not know. Give that to your young teachers. They will feel relaxed, more relaxed, and say, okay, then what is the strategy? Well, I call this engineering. And Billy Cohen in 85 and earlier, in his engineering method, gave a beautiful definition of engineering. I've been looking for years to give a name to this concept and say, by the engineering method, I mean the strategy for causing the best change in a poorly understood or uncertain situation within the available resources. And I said, this is a beautiful definition of education. Tell teachers to apply the strategy when not enough knowledge is available. So how do you do that? You build a hypothesis, you say, you formulate the best possible guess, but not like that, okay? You try to formulate a good hypothesis based on a reasoning, and you try to formulate in advance what you expect. So educational engineering is for going through analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. You make this in the first loop and say, it's not perfect what we see, but you learn from it. You evaluate your hypothesis, and in the second cycle, you adjust it and you see what the result is. Well, I can talk for more than 10 hours about this, but the most important thing is it's iterative, cyclic, real world. That means that as a research, I consider this research. Every teacher can do research this way because it's about applying a model and developing and improving the model. Well, just to give you an example, this is how my educational engineering model works, which I give to teachers and say, this is how you think about iteratively every time you start with your course, designing your course, you go through the analysis, blah, 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 your context, who are the learners, what are the objectives, you know about that. But very importantly, and all the rest of the steps, you know that. The most important stage in design is conceptualization and specification, because I want to come back to technology in a moment. This model, the hypotheses I have been developing over in my career, they are described in detail in a publication from 2010. It's the ecological paradigm shift, process-oriented paradigm shift. I call them paradigm shifts because they turn around our way of thinking. Ecological paradigm shift means that the learning effect that you expect does not come from one particular technology. Never has it been the case that by adding one specific technology to a learning environment that you can measure a learning effect. No, the learning effect can only be measured through the entire learning environment as an ecology. So you can only measure that on that. Meaning that what they call blended learning is just adding a technology and say, oh, I have a better learning environment because it's blended. I have added technology. If you do not redesign your learning environment, then you will not measure any generalizable inherent effect. Process-oriented do not focus on the product, but on the process. As I said, demand paradigm shift, do not focus on what's on offer, but what you need. And very importantly, the psychological paradigm shift. What I mean is in the design process, I said in the beginning, don't ask people what they want. I have been developing a technique for trying to determine what people actually want. And there's some people, meaning your audience, your group of learners. And that's somewhere between self-determination theory, which defines, as you know, universal, innate, global psychological needs, like relatedness, autonomy, and competence. And on the other hand, a very interesting model that you also should read about, it's readable and understandable, the L2 self model by Dernier and Ushoda, which determines a motivation, describes a motivational model for individual learners. What I have developed is the personal goal theory. That means that how can you determine for a group of learners what they need and want without them knowing it? And it's a very simple technique that you can find in my article, is saying, well, simple, it's an analysis of negative feelings. You ask the students what they think about your course, but you ask them to say what they don't like. And then you write all these adjectives on the blackboard. You ask them, fill in the sentence, how do I feel? I think, I have written it here on the bottom of the page. My first question is, which problems do you have with this course? Second, when you think about these problems, you feel. That's already a very interesting vocabulary exercise. And then you feel because you. What's interesting is that it's very difficult for learners to answer that question. It takes 15 minutes, 20 minutes to find the right, I feel frustrated. Let's take the example of frustrated. When they say, I feel frustrated, beautiful example. Frustrated means, okay, there's a problem. But frustrated also means immediately that there's a willingness to do something, to achieve something, but they are in the impossibility due to a number of factors. And that is my theory, not only mine, is that every negative feeling shows positive volition. What's important in this is that most learners are not aware of what's really pushing them to wanting something and to have these negative feelings. If you're interested in this theory, you can read this article. It's not very theoretical. It's with many, many, many examples and how it came along. I then applied it. It's far too complex to read all this, but just to show that the complete personal goal theory is also for teachers, for yourself. If you want to feel better in your job, I told you I'm happy now because the pressure is not there anymore. But I would like to give the same feeling for teachers who have far too many things to do in their life, have far too many goals. But the same thing is, there is an interesting role for technology. I come to that point. And then you see the different role of technology for AI, etc. How can technology help teachers find this compromise between conflicting musts and wants? And this is where the friction, cognitive and emotional friction, comes from in your situation, also in your job. If you feel sometimes unhappy, it's because the things you have to do conflict with what you want to do on a subconscious level. Now, if you design trying to find a compromise for teachers, and you do that also, that becomes the learning environment, which is the must for learners, you identify what they want, and you see, In Belgium, when I started as a language teacher, I had a very simple example. My learners had to learn French. I don't know much about what you know about. I don't know what you know about the actual situation in Belgium, or in Flanders, but our students don't want to learn French. So immediately I was confronted as a young teacher with, oops, how am I going to do this? Not with games. We did not have games in the 80s, not yet. But I tried, I had immediately this feeling and this frustration, I want to do something about it. And this is the way, it's very complex. If you're interested, read the article or write to me, I will send you, or whatever, we can talk about this. But this is the way, complex model, just to identify what do people really want. And if you find a compromise for teachers and learners, that is the basis, the design basis, the starting point for your design, not technology. The starting point for designing your learning environment is trying to find the compromise between conflicting goals, personal goals, and etc. Now, if you see, now, based on that, you go to the different stages of design. I'm watching the clock. Then in design, you have the pedagogical layer. Well, that's application, as I said, of the models that you want to apply. The content layer, where I'm going to find my content, not by content providers. Architecture layer, blah, blah. But in fact, the last layer, the last step is the specification of requirements, meaning, okay, if I want to create a learning environment that creates this, that appeals to the subconscious goal realization, then what I need something that is not there yet. In our case, mostly technology. Okay. Okay. There was an example of the pedagogical layer. What does that mean? Well, I was glad to hear many people talk about multimodality. And this is an example just of how what I gave to my students to say, hey, if you design a multimodal learning environment as a requirement, I say as a requirement, teachers say here, what I would need to make an optimal or a better learning environment would be not all of these 16 activities, but think about how can some of these activities contribute to a better learning environment. You know all about these, but it's a useful framework to say, a kind of a checklist. That might be interesting. I'm not talking about technology yet. It's only, but you're still talking about the pedagogical level. And this is an example for L1, how you can define, depending on context. I'm not saying it's universal, but it's an example of how you can, in the left column on the left, how you can define requirements for L1 learning environments. And in my case, of course, I'm very interested in what would be the transfer to, you see the bridge, to L2 acquisition. The more we create similar learning environments where we play, I don't know, I leave that up to you, to what extent that the way we create learning environments may have an effect on what we, for L1, may have an effect on L2. Too much to read now. If you want a presentation, just ask. Okay, I come back to my definition. The added value of a technology is the match between the requirements of a learning environment and the affordances of a technology. Okay, any technology, apply it to any technology that you know. Learning environment is what I said, is the result of your design. Don't forget, it's a mental thing, it's a blueprint. A learning environment is not what exists, it's what you have in mind, what you design. And the requirements is what you do not have yet. It's a difference between what the blueprint, the mental model, and what the learning environment that exists in practice. That's the requirement, that's what you still need. Output, I said, it's the result of we are not there yet. We did not start from technology and the new possibilities afforded by technology. It's by analyzing what learners and teachers need, we apply the pedagogy, we look for content, and then we say, okay, what's missing is this. Then we need to compare that, match that with the affordances. And now we have to be very careful with the word affordance. It's the most important, in my view, it's the most important word in educational technology. It should be ours, meaning if you want to be respected as a discipline, make sure that you have your own respected terminology. And in my view, affordance could be one. If we define it in the sense of Norman and Gibson, etc., a lot of literature on it. But in my view, what's important in the word affordance is not just a new activity, but the focus is on the psychological thing. This is very important, the perception. That means that an affordance is a perceived possible contribution to goal realization. Hey, this is interesting. We have been talking about goal realization on the subconscious level. An affordance of technology is the first thing that comes to mind when you see a new technology. that you feel on a subconscious level immediately, this thing can help me. If you see a piece of iron and some wood, you might say, well, I don't know what it is. But some people might say, well, this is a very useful tool that I can use at home. Then the added value defined as the reason for using that technology. And, well, we call it an ontological specification of added value because it's a transdisciplinary specification. Let me explain that. The concept of affordance is the quality or property of an object that suggests its possible uses. Well, my definition would be, as I said, the perceived potential contribution to goal realization. So if we have to be very careful with the word affordance. It's not just an advantage or an innovative feature. Why is it an important word? Because it's a transdisciplinary word. And what is transdisciplinary? Our problem is that has been always, since I started, there was a problem. You were or a language specialist, or a pedagogical specialist, or, what did I say, technological specialist. And in that period, we made interdisciplinary teams. So our problem is, how can you combine all these sciences? The only solution is to work on transdisciplinary concepts. That means that we have to look together for terms, terminology, concepts, methods, etc., that we can understand wherever you come from. So that's a boundary transcending concept, and I've written an article about that if you're interested in ontological specification. Very important to talk about the same things. I've talked to people, and then after 2 minutes I realized, well, I thought I knew what I was talking about, and people understand. And here again, I suppose, I can't say I will continue for another 20 years, but I have not finished yet. Some quick examples, but I must be honest. I said if I give examples now of high added value or low added value of technology, you should know there's no universal thing to say about a technology because it depends on context, okay? But I asked ChatGPT the following examples. I said, ChatGPT, can you give me some examples of high added value and poor added value of technologies? And these were the results. Okay, these were my examples. Okay, I will skip that. Oh yeah, sorry, I'm going too quickly here. Should go back, sorry. My examples were a technology that affords teachers to feel respect, enjoyment, and satisfaction, to have less paperwork, and to see the result of their work. Wouldn't that be something if we see as teachers more result of what we do? If you're grading all day long, giving feedback to teachers, to learners writing, don't you feel sometimes, why am I doing this? But if there was a technology, if there were a technology where you could see the result of what you do, if you spend 10 minutes with one student, that you feel that was useful. If technology can help you with that, that is increasing added value. To know how they can design their own learning environment in a justifiable way. Or a technology that affords learners to feel confident, to know where they are in the learning process, to be able to rely on peers and to feel supported by their teachers' feedback. Apply that to your context. Ask yourself, okay, talking about context, well, we talked about the design process. There's another article you can read. And the context is an aspect of the theme of this conference. I need to explain, well, Vygotskian, sociocultural context is a context that does not change quickly. You have the educational context created by a school, might change quicker. But what people often forget is the geotemporal context, is the time and the place where the learner is, which has changed considerably since the pandemic. And now we can work at school or at home, the learners as well. We learn what they call ubiquitous learning. But there's a fourth context now, and that's the learning environment itself. The three first contexts play a very important role in the design process, which create a learning environment, but it's the learning environment that, together with the three other, plays an important role in the learning and teaching process. So the notion of context is important. We cannot say, I was going too quickly here. I cannot say, well, if you ask me which technology has higher added value, you need to calculate it for your context and for your goals. Examples of my background is, well, I grew up in Flanders. That means that I grew up with a dialect as mother tongue, which is a little bit like Catalan and Castellano, which from a viewpoint of vocabulary and morphology are completely different. The only difference is that in Flanders, it's not recognized as an official language. So we learn Dutch as I speak it on radio and television, as a foreign language, but in my time, in a very explicit way. So we have been working on that phenomenon of learning what should be the mother tongue as a foreign language. So I have been spending a lot of time. I've been analyzing the situation in Catalonia, and we had a project in Chile where the problem is the level of English at the university. We created some very exciting learning environments, but we did not get the result that we wanted, and that was due to some specific linguistic and psychological aspects. Okay, the examples given by ChatGPT. For writing revision, it says, well, generative AI as a technology has a high match between the requirements and the affordances. Now, I say, I tricked them into this thing because, as I said, affordances depend on the goals of the people who have to use the technology, subconscious goals. So they are context dependent. Requirements are the result of the design process, so context dependent. But ChatGPT says the affordances directly support the requirement for timely formative feedback. That means that, well, on a general level, you could say that generative AI has a high match between the requirements and the affordances according to ChatGPT. Just to give you some other examples, I asked for Google Docs and collaborative writing, also very high match. I used it myself with my students, and that went extremely well. So, identity development, the requirement, if you're in your learning environment for L1, you need something about personal expression, reflection, and identity formation, then it says that the digital portfolio has the affordances of multimodal expression, longitudinal reflection, and ownership of learning. Differentiation, high match, true adaptive learning systems, which should not be intelligent because I can develop an adaptive learning system which is very simple in software, should not be really intelligent. Then an example of a poor match is VR for vocabulary memorization, according to ChatGPT. Generative AI for identity formation, problematic. There has been many people talking about this problem of authenticity, flattening of linguistic expression, LMS because it's available, etc. Just some examples of potentially low. Okay, so I say, try to apply the formula to your own context, to your own learners by analyzing their goals, and then you will see, I hope that you will find a better way for selecting or justifying the use of specific technologies. That's a demand-driven approach. That means that the discussion is not about, oh, there is AI, what are you going with? We should use it, and if we use it, then we have problems. That you don't want to go there. We have seen this over the last 40 years, again and again and again. My point is, are we going to make the same mistake again, or are we finally going to learn from the past and first define what we need in order to evaluate what we need, the usefulness, the added value of a technology for your specific context. So, if you want to do research about generalizability of added value is only possible through the extent that goals and needs are generalizable. That's what I just showed with the examples. I don't know to what extent they are generalizable. I don't know. But the most important thing is not immediately generalizability. The most important thing that we can work together with your feedback on this model that we can give to people on the same model, that should be generalizable. That leads to diverse results. And this is a discussion. It's up to teachers to decide for themselves which technology to use, how, where, when, why, and with whom. Of course, based on good information and literature. People will say, yes, but in teacher education, they are already overloaded. My point is, with more than 30 years in teacher education, well, you would gain an enormous amount of time. Instead of telling teachers what to do, just train them, give them the model I talked about, and say, this is the way that it's like forming architects or chefs in the cuisine, in the kitchen. It's not trying to execute a recipe, it's trying to make their own recipes. Please only use models, approaches, and policies that support, enable, equip, and empower teachers and learners. Technology should never be a patch to our learning environment. It's more a question of matching affordances and requirements. And I said, well, if we talk about goals and needs and requirements, okay, let's work together on terms like affordances so that we can communicate across disciplines better and build more knowledge in this way. And, well, I repeat myself, there's an absolute need for a demand-driven approach. That was a little bit my point, okay? Time for some questions. If you have more, if you want my slides or more feedback, keep me informed. I will probably continue for some months or years if my wife allows it, and my 8 grandchildren. So no, when I wake up in the morning, I think, well, I can paint something in my house, I can do some cooking, I can babysit the grandchildren, and wow, I can still write an article on something or go to a conference. Thank you so much for your attention.